Welcome everyone. I hope you all enjoy these short Reddit stories. And if you have any Reddit stories you would like to share with me, please email them. Also, the background to all of my videos is my new Minecraft Forever world, which I want to be as interactive as possible. So, if there is any builds or lore or anything else that you would want me to do, please comment below. With that all done, let's begin. Story number 1. My girlfriend kept disappearing every Friday night. There was a post on Reddit that started with a simple question. Am I overthinking this, or is something really wrong? At first, it sounded like a typical relationship problem. A guy in his mid-20s had been dating his girlfriend Emma for almost 3 years. According to him, their relationship was perfect. No major fights, no cheating scandals, no trust issues, nothing. But there was one thing he couldn't explain. Every single Friday night, Emma disappeared. Not physically vanished. She would simply leave. No matter what was happening, no matter what plans they had, no matter what was going on in her life, every Friday at exactly 8 p.m., she would leave and not return until sometime after midnight. And she refused to tell him where she went. At first, he didn't think much of it. Everyone deserves privacy. Everyone has hobbies. Everyone has parts of their life they don't share with everyone else. But over time, things became strange. Whenever he asked about it, Emma would smile and say, "It's just something I have to do. That's it. No explanation, no details, no conversation. Just those 7 words. The first year of the relationship, he accepted it. The second year, he became curious. By the third year, it was driving him insane. Because it wasn't just that she disappeared, it was how carefully she protected the secret. If friends asked where she was going, she'd change the subject. If family members asked, she'd laugh it off. Nobody seemed to know. Or if they did know, they weren't talking. The Reddit poster admitted something that many people probably wouldn't. He said he became obsessed. Every Friday he watched the clock. 7:30 p.m., 7:45 p.m., 7:55 p.m., then exactly 8 p.m. Emma would grab her keys, put on a jacket, kiss him goodbye, and leave, like clockwork. One Friday, he finally decided he was going to follow her. He knew it wasn't healthy. He knew it was an invasion of privacy. But after 3 years of unanswered questions, curiosity won. He waited 10 minutes after she left, then got into his car and followed. At first, everything seemed normal. She drove across town, past shopping centres, past restaurants, past neighbourhoods. Then she entered a part of the city he'd never really visited before. An older section. A poorer section. The kind of place most people drove through but never stopped in. Eventually, she parked. He stayed several buildings back, watching, waiting, trying not to be seen. Then he saw something that immediately confused him. Emma wasn't entering a bar, or a friend's house, or another man's apartment. She walked into a community centre, a small brick building. Old, worn down. Nothing special. He sat in his car for nearly 20 minutes. Then he finally got out, walking toward the building, trying to look casual, trying not to attract attention. The closer he got, the more confused he became. Because through the windows he could hear laughter, children laughing. Dozens of them. When he reached the door, he looked inside. And what he saw completely shattered every theory he'd built up in his head. Emma was surrounded by children. Not 1 or 2, more than 30. Some looked 8 years old. Some looked 12. A few looked older. They were eating pizza, playing board games, doing homework, talking, laughing. And Emma was right in the middle of it all, helping, teaching, encouraging, smiling. The Reddit poster said he'd never seen her look happier. Not at parties, not on vacations, not on birthdays, not ever. Before he could enter, an older woman approached him. She asked if she could help him. He explained that he was looking for Emma. The woman's expression immediately changed. Not suspicious, not angry, just surprised. Then she asked a question. "You're Emma's boyfriend?" He said, "Yes." The woman stared at him for a few seconds, quietly said, "She never talks about herself here." That sentence stuck with him. She never talks about herself here. Why? The woman eventually explained. Years ago, Emma had grown up in that neighborhood. Her family struggled financially. There were periods when food was scarce. Periods when utilities were shut off. Periods when things got very difficult. According to the woman, there was a community center that helped her family survive. Volunteers provided meals. Tutors helped her stay in school. Mentors gave her support. People who barely knew her invested their time in her future. One volunteer in particular had changed her life. An older teacher who stayed after hours helping her with schoolwork, helping her apply for scholarships, helping her believe she could escape the cycle she was born into. Years later, Emma graduated college, built a career, created a stable life, and made a promise. Every Friday night for the rest of her life, she'd come back and help other kids the way someone once helped her. The Reddit poster said he stood there speechless. Because suddenly everything made sense. The secrecy, the consistency, the dedication, the refusal to miss a Friday. But one question still remained. Why hide it? Why not tell him? Why not tell anyone? The answer came later that night. When Emma finally noticed him, she looked shocked. Not angry, not embarrassed, just shocked. They stepped outside. And before he could even explain himself, she started apologizing. Over and over. Apologizing. Confused, he asked why she was sorry. She looked down for a moment, and then said something he said he'd never forget. Because I didn't want anyone to think I was doing it to look like a good person. She explained that growing up poor had left scars she rarely talked about. She hated pity. She hated attention. She hated being praised for helping others. In her mind, volunteering wasn't something noble. It was simply a debt she could never fully repay. People had saved her life. Now she was trying to do the same for someone else. That's why she never posted about it online, never mentioned it in conversations, never brought it up with co-workers, never even told the person she loved, not because she didn't trust him, but because it wasn't about her. The Reddit post could have ended there. But it didn't. Because something happened next that made the story even more emotional. A few weeks later, one of the children at the center approached Emma. A quiet boy, maybe 11 years old. The kind of kid who rarely spoke. He handed her a folded piece of paper, then ran away before she could open it. Inside was a handwritten letter. The boy explained that before coming to the center, he thought nobody cared about him. His parents were going through serious problems. School was difficult. Life felt hopeless. But every Friday, Emma remembered his name, asked about his week, helped with homework, listened when he needed someone to talk to. At the bottom of the letter was a sentence that made Emma cry, and eventually made thousands of Reddit readers cry too. The boy wrote, "When I grow up, I want to be the person you are." The Reddit poster said Emma broke down the moment she read it, not because of pride, not because of recognition, but because she realized something, the same thing that volunteer had once been to her. She had become for someone else. One act of kindness had traveled across generations. One person helping a struggling child, that child growing up, then helping another struggling child, who might someday help someone else. It's impossible to measure how many lives can be changed by one decision, one conversation, one Friday night, one person deciding to show up. The post exploded. Thousands of comments poured in. People shared stories about teachers who changed their lives, coaches who believed in them, neighbors who helped them, mentors who kept them from giving up. Many said the story reminded them that some of the most important people in the world are people whose names you'll never hear. People who don't become famous. People who don't go viral. People who never receive awards. People who quietly make someone else's life better, then go home without telling anyone. The Reddit poster ended the story with a final update. A few months after discovering Emma's secret, he started volunteering too. Not because she asked him to, because she didn't, but after seeing what happened every Friday night, he couldn't ignore it. He wanted to help, even in a small way. And for the first time in 3 years, Friday nights were no longer a mystery. Instead of sitting at home wondering where Emma went, he was right there beside her, helping the next generation, one Friday at a time. And maybe that's the real reason this story resonated with so many people. Not because it was dramatic, not because it involved betrayal, not because it involved some shocking twist, but because in a world where we're constantly shown the worst parts of humanity, it reminded people that there are still individuals quietly doing good things when nobody is watching. And sometimes, the most powerful stories aren't about heroes. They're about ordinary people who simply refuse to stop showing up. Story 2. The Letter. My father never intended me to read. I came across a Reddit post a few years ago that started with a sentence so simple that most people probably would have scrolled right past it. The author wrote, "My father died 2 years ago, and yesterday I found a letter that was never meant for me." At first, it sounded like one of those stories where someone discovers a hidden family secret, but as thousands of readers would later find out, it became something much deeper. The author explained that his father had passed away unexpectedly from a heart attack at the age of 57. They had never been particularly close. There wasn't any dramatic falling out between them, but there was always a distance that neither of them knew how to bridge. His father had been the type of man who worked long hours, came home exhausted, sat quietly through dinner, watched television, and then went to bed. He wasn't cruel, abusive, or absent. He was simply emotionally unavailable. The author described growing up feeling as though he lived with a stranger who happened to share his last name. His father provided for the family, attended the occasional school event, and made sure bills were paid. But he rarely spoke about feelings, dreams, fears, or anything personal. As a child, the author spent years trying to earn his father's approval. He played sports because he thought his father would be proud. His father barely reacted. He brought home excellent grades because he thought that might finally spark some recognition. His father nodded and said, "Good job." When he graduated high school, his father shook his hand instead of hugging him. When he graduated college, his father missed the ceremony because of work. Every milestone in his life seemed to pass with little acknowledgement, and over time, resentment began to grow. By the time he reached adulthood, he had accepted that the close father-son relationship he always wanted simply wasn't going to happen. They would never be the kind of father and son who spent hours talking about life. They would never be best friends. They would never have emotional conversations. They would simply coexist. Then his father died, and suddenly all the opportunities for those conversations disappeared forever. The author admitted that one of the hardest parts of grief wasn't sadness, it was regret. He regretted all the questions he never asked. He regretted never understanding who his father really was beneath the quiet exterior. He regretted assuming there would always be more time. For 2 years, those regrets stayed with him. Then, one afternoon, while helping his mother clean out an old storage room in the basement, he found a dusty cardboard box tucked behind several shelves. Inside were old tax returns, photographs, receipts, and notebooks. Most of it was unremarkable until he discovered a sealed envelope with his father's handwriting on the front. What immediately caught his attention was the name written on it. It wasn't addressed to him. It wasn't addressed to his mother. It was addressed to a man whose name he had never heard before. The envelope had never been mailed. There was no stamp, no postmark, nothing. Just a name and an address from over 30 years earlier. Curiosity got the better of him. He opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter spanning several pages. What he read completely changed the way he viewed his father. The letter had been written when his father was 23 years old, long before marriage, long before children, long before the life everyone knew him for. The letter revealed that his father had once dreamed of becoming a musician. Not casually, not as a hobby. It had been his entire life. According to the letter, he had spent years writing songs, performing at local venues, and chasing opportunities. The man the letter was addressed to had been his closest friend and bandmate. Together, they planned to move across the country to pursue music full-time. They believed they could make it. They believed they were on the edge of something big. Then life happened. His father met the woman who would later become his wife. Unexpected financial problems struck his family. His own father became sick. Responsibilities began piling up faster than opportunities appeared. Slowly, the dream slipped away. The letter wasn't angry or bitter. It was heartbreaking because it was honest. His father admitted he was afraid. Afraid of failing. Afraid of disappointing everyone depending on him. Afraid of risking everything for a dream that might never come true. The letter explained that he had decided not to move away. Not to pursue music. Not to take the chance. He was choosing stability over uncertainty. Near the middle of the letter, one paragraph stood out more than any other. His father wrote that he hoped one day he would have children, and that if he did, he hoped they would never inherit his fear. He hoped they would be brave enough to chase whatever dream mattered most to them. The author said he stopped reading at that point because he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The man he knew as emotionally distant and silent had once been passionate, vulnerable, and full of ambition. As he continued reading, the revelations became even more surprising. His father described feeling trapped by his own choices, not because he hated his family, but because he struggled with the feeling that he had abandoned a part of himself. He worried that one day his future children would see him as boring, ordinary, or uninspiring because they would never know who he used to be. The author admitted that sentence hit him harder than anything else, because that was exactly how he had viewed his father for most of his life. The rest of the letter was filled with reflections about sacrifice, responsibility, and growing older. Then came a final paragraph that completely shattered him. His father wrote that if he ever became a parent, he would probably fail at expressing love. He explained that his own father never expressed affection, and that he didn't know how to break the cycle. He worried that his children might mistake silence for indifference. He worried they might think he didn't care. He worried they might never realize how deeply he loved them because he lacked the ability to show it. Reading those words felt like hearing a message sent decades through time. Suddenly memories began flooding back. Memories he had ignored for years. He remembered his father waking up at 4 a.m. to drive him to sports tournaments. He remembered his father working overtime every holiday season. He remembered his father quietly repairing things around the house without ever complaining. He remembered his father attending games after 12-hour shifts and standing silently in the background. He remembered countless sacrifices he had dismissed because they weren't accompanied by emotional speeches or displays of affection. For the first time, he began viewing those actions through a different lens. What if his father had been expressing love all along? What if the problem wasn't that his father didn't care? What if the problem was that his father only knew one language: sacrifice? The Reddit post resonated with millions of people because so many readers saw their own parents in the story. Comment after comment appeared from people describing fathers who never said, "I love you," but worked themselves to exhaustion, providing for their families. Others shared stories of parents who carried invisible burdens their children never understood until adulthood. The author spent weeks researching his father's past after finding the letter. He eventually tracked down the man it had been addressed to. To his surprise, the man was still alive. They spoke on the phone for hours. The friend confirmed everything in the letter. He described the author's father as one of the most talented musicians he had ever known. He talked about nights spent writing songs together and dreams they believed were within reach. Then he said something that stuck with the author forever. He explained that while he had pursued the dream, it hadn't gone the way they expected. The music career never truly happened. There were years of financial struggle, failed opportunities, and disappointment. Looking back, he wasn't sure either path had been better. They were simply different. One man chased the dream and sacrificed stability. The other sacrificed the dream and gained a family. Neither escaped regret entirely. Neither escaped wondering what might have happened. That realization became the true heart of the story. Many people spend their lives believing there is a perfect choice somewhere out there, a path where no sacrifices are required and no regrets exist. But life rarely works that way. Every decision closes certain doors while opening others. The author's father lost a dream, but he gained a family he loved more than he could express. The friend gained adventure, but lost things the father eventually found. Neither life was perfect. Both contained joy and pain. Several months after discovering the letter, the author found an old cassette tape hidden among his father's belongings. He managed to convert it into a digital recording. For the first time in his life, he heard his father singing. Not speaking. Singing. The recording was rough and decades old, but hearing his father's younger voice filled him with emotions he couldn't describe. It felt like meeting a completely different person. Someone he should have known, but never did. Someone hidden beneath years of responsibility and routine. The final update to the Reddit story came nearly a year later. The author revealed that he had recently become a father himself. He said the experience completely transformed his understanding of his own dad. Suddenly, he understood the constant worry, the pressure, the desire to protect your child from every possible hardship. He also understood how easy it is to accidentally repeat patterns inherited from previous generations. The story ended with him writing a letter of his own, addressed to his newborn child. In it, he promised to be more open with his emotions than his father had been. But he also promised something else. He promised to tell his child stories about their grandfather. Not the quiet man everyone remembered, the young musician, the dreamer, the man who carried a lifetime of love he struggled to express, the man who worried his children would never know how much he cared. The post concluded with a sentence that thousands of readers said left them in tears. He wrote, "My father spent his entire life afraid I would misunderstand him, and it took a letter he never meant me to read for me to finally understand him." And maybe that's why the story spread so widely across the internet, because it reminded people of something easy to forget. Every parent, every stranger, every person we think we know is carrying an entire history we may never see. Untold dreams, silent sacrifices, hidden fears, forgotten ambitions, lives within lives. And sometimes the people who seem the hardest to understand are the people who loved us the most. Story 3. I found out why my older brother hated me, and it changed everything. I stumbled across a Reddit story a while back that started with a sentence so ordinary that almost nobody would have expected what was coming next. The author wrote, "My older brother and I haven't spoken in 11 years, and last week I learned why." At first, it sounded like a typical family drama. Most people know someone who has gone years without talking to a sibling. Maybe there was a fight. Maybe there was jealousy. Maybe life simply pulled them apart. But as the story unfolded, readers realized it wasn't really about a feud at all. It was about a misunderstanding so devastating that it stole more than a decade from two people's lives. The author explained that he was 29 years old. His brother, Ryan, was 36. Growing up, Ryan had always seemed distant, not openly hostile, not abusive, just cold. The author described a childhood filled with moments that felt impossible to understand. If he entered a room, Ryan often left. If he tried to spend time with him, Ryan would usually find an excuse to go somewhere else. Family vacations felt awkward because Ryan acted more like a reluctant babysitter than a brother. Birthdays were the same. Holidays were the same. School events were the same. The author spent years wondering what he had done wrong. As a child, he assumed he was simply annoying. Younger siblings often idolize older siblings. They want attention. They want approval. They want to feel included. The author followed Ryan everywhere. He wanted to play the same games, listen to the same music, wear similar clothes. He thought Ryan was the coolest person in the world. But the admiration never seemed to be returned. Instead, he often felt tolerated. The strange thing was that everyone else loved Ryan. Teachers praised him. Neighbors admired him. Family members constantly talked about how responsible and mature he was. Nobody seemed to understand why there was such a wall between the two brothers. Whenever the author brought it up, his parents would brush it off. They'd say things like, "That's just how older brothers are," or "He'll grow out of it eventually." But he never did. As the years passed, the distance only grew. By high school, conversations between them were almost non-existent. They lived in the same house, but barely acknowledged each other. Sometimes entire weeks passed without more than a few words exchanged. The author admitted that over time, admiration turned into resentment. If Ryan didn't want a relationship, then fine. He stopped trying. Then came the event that completely shattered whatever remained of their connection. Their father died. The author was 18. Ryan was 25. The loss hit the entire family hard. Their father had been the center of everything. The one who organized holidays. The one who fixed problems. The one who made everyone laugh. Losing him felt like losing the foundation beneath the family. For a brief moment, the author thought the tragedy might bring him and Ryan closer together. Instead, the opposite happened. Ryan became even more distant. After the funeral, he moved several states away. Phone calls became rare. Visits became rare. Eventually, they stopped entirely. Years passed. Then more years. Birthdays went by without messages. Holidays came and went. The brothers became strangers. The author eventually stopped expecting things to change. He built a life, got a career, made friends, moved on. At least that's what he told himself. The truth was that part of him never stopped wondering why. Why had Ryan always treated him differently? Why had there always been a wall? Why had nobody ever explained it? Then, 11 years after their last real conversation, something unexpected happened. Their mother called. She had been cleaning out the attic. While sorting through old boxes, she'd found something she thought belonged to Ryan. The problem was that Ryan wasn't answering his phone. She asked the author if he could stop by and help. Reluctantly, he agreed. The attic was filled with decades of memories. Old photographs, school projects, home videos, dust-covered boxes nobody had opened in years. Eventually, they found the box. It was labeled with Ryan's name. Inside were notebooks, report cards, and random childhood items. Then they found a journal. Not a diary exactly. More like a collection of thoughts. The earliest entries were written when Ryan was 13. The author hesitated. Reading someone else's private journal felt wrong. But curiosity won. And within minutes, his entire understanding of his family began to collapse. The first entry that caught his attention was dated just a few months before he was born. Ryan wrote about being excited to become a big brother. He talked about teaching him sports, teaching him video games, protecting him, being his hero. The author stopped reading, confused. This didn't sound like the brother he remembered at all. He kept going. Then he found an entry written shortly after his birth. Everything changed. Ryan described hearing a conversation between their parents, a conversation he wasn't supposed to hear. According to the journal, Ryan accidentally overheard their father speaking to their mother late one night. Their father apparently admitted something he deeply regretted. Years earlier, before Ryan was born, he'd wanted children more than anything. But after years of financial struggles and stress, by the time the author was conceived, things were different. The pregnancy had been unexpected. Their father had supposedly said something along the lines of, "I don't know if we can handle another child right now." A moment of fear. A moment of uncertainty. A moment countless parents have probably experienced. But Ryan didn't hear the entire conversation. He only heard fragments. And from those fragments, he reached a devastating conclusion. He believed his father didn't want the new baby. He believed the baby was a burden. He believed the baby was the reason everyone in the family seemed stressed. That baby was the author. The journal entries became heartbreaking. Ryan wrote about watching his parents struggle financially, watching arguments increase, watching stress consume the household. And because of the misunderstanding he'd created in his own mind, he blamed everything on his little brother. Not consciously, not maliciously, but emotionally. The author described feeling physically sick while reading, because suddenly decades of behavior made sense. Ryan wasn't cold because he hated him. Ryan was cold because he spent years believing something that wasn't true. The journal showed a teenager carrying a misconception that slowly grew stronger with time. Every family argument became evidence. Every financial problem became evidence. Every stressful moment became evidence. The belief rooted itself deeper and deeper. Then another entry appeared. One written when Ryan was 16. And it changed everything again. Ryan admitted he was beginning to think he might be wrong. He wrote that the author, still a little kid at the time, adored him, looked up to him, followed him everywhere, wanted his approval. Ryan described feeling guilty, because despite all the resentment he carried, he couldn't find a reason to hate his brother. The child had never done anything wrong. The resentment made no logical sense anymore. But emotions rarely disappear simply because logic arrives. Years of misplaced blame had already shaped their relationship. The wall had already been built. Ryan didn't know how to tear it down. So instead, he withdrew. Distance became easier than vulnerability. Avoidance became easier than honesty. The journal continued through high school, then college, then adulthood. The entries grew more painful. Ryan repeatedly mentioned wanting to fix things, wanting to explain, wanting to apologize. But every year that passed made the conversation harder. The silence became its own prison. Eventually, so much time had passed that Ryan convinced himself it was too late. Then the author reached an entry dated 3 days after their father's death. And this was the moment that made thousands of Reddit readers cry. Ryan wrote that after the funeral, he finally learned the truth. A family friend revealed the full conversation he'd overheard years earlier. The missing context. The missing pieces. The reality. Their father had never said he didn't want the baby. He had been terrified he wouldn't be able to provide enough. That was all. The concern came from love. Not rejection. Not resentment. Love. For over a decade, Ryan had built his entire understanding of the family around a misunderstanding. And now, suddenly, it was gone. The journal entry described overwhelming guilt. Crushing guilt. The kind of guilt that arrives when you realize you spent years hurting someone who never deserved it. Ryan wrote page after page about regret. Regret for every ignored conversation, every missed opportunity, every birthday, every holiday, every moment he could have been a brother, but chose not to be. The author admitted he could barely continue reading, because for the first time in his life, he wasn't reading about the brother he knew. He was reading about a man who had been trapped inside his own mistakes. The final entry in the journal was written about 2 months after their father's funeral. Ryan wrote that he planned to call, planned to apologize, planned to tell the truth. Then there were no more entries. Nothing. The journal simply ended. The author immediately called his mother, asked if she knew anything. She didn't. He asked relatives. Nobody knew. He spent days trying to understand what had happened. Eventually, he decided there was only one option left. He had to find Ryan. Not through social media. Not through text. In person. After 11 years. He took time off work. Drove hundreds of miles. And arrived at Ryan's home. The drive felt surreal. Every mile brought more questions. Would Ryan answer? Would he even recognize him? Would he care? Would he slam the door? The author admitted he almost turned around several times. But eventually, he arrived. And knocked. The door opened. For several seconds, neither brother spoke. 11 years of silence stood between them. Then Ryan looked at him and immediately started crying. Not slowly. Not subtly. Immediately. As if he'd been carrying something unbearable for years. The author said it was the first time he'd ever seen his brother cry. Neither of them knew what to say. So they sat and talked. For nearly 8 hours. Ryan explained everything. The misunderstanding. The guilt. The fear. The shame. Everything. The author asked the obvious question. If you knew the truth after Dad died, why didn't you call? Ryan's answer hit thousands of readers hard. He said, because every year I waited made it harder. Eventually I became more afraid of your reaction than I was of losing you. That's something many people understood instantly. Sometimes the thing preventing reconciliation isn't anger. It's shame. Shame convinces people they're beyond forgiveness. Shame convinces people it's too late. Shame convinces people silence is safer, even when silence causes more damage. The conversation continued late into the night. They talked about childhood memories, their father, their regrets, their lives. Everything they'd missed. Everything they'd lost. Everything they still had a chance to rebuild. The Reddit post became incredibly popular because it wasn't really about two brothers. It was about how fragile relationships can be, how easily misunderstandings grow when nobody talks, how assumptions can quietly become beliefs, and how beliefs can shape entire lives. Readers flooded the comments with their own stories. Stories about estranged siblings, estranged parents, estranged friends. Relationships destroyed, not by hatred, but by silence. Not by cruelty, but by misunderstanding. Many admitted they'd spent years waiting for the other person to make the first move. Years. Sometimes decades. The author updated the post several months later. The brothers had begun rebuilding their relationship. Slowly. Awkwardly. Not perfectly. Years of distance don't disappear overnight. But they were trying. For the first time in their lives, they were actually trying. Then came the final update. One that made the entire story feel complete. The author revealed that his first child had recently been born. When he arrived at the hospital, he found Ryan waiting outside, holding a small gift. Inside the gift box was the old journal, along with a note. The note contained only one sentence. A sentence Ryan had apparently spent years wanting to say. It read, "I spent most of my life believing I lost my brother because of something you did. The truth is, I almost lost my brother because of something I never had the courage to say." The author said Ryan finally got to hold his newborn nephew that day. And for the first time in nearly 30 years, the two brothers took a picture together. A real picture. Not one forced at a holiday gathering. Not one taken because their parents wanted it. A picture they actually wanted. The final line of the Reddit story stayed with readers long after they finished reading. The author wrote, "The saddest part isn't that we lost 11 years. The saddest part is how close we came to losing the rest of our lives too." And maybe that's why the story resonated with so many people. Because almost everyone has a conversation they're avoiding, a phone call they're postponing, an apology they're afraid to make, a misunderstanding they've allowed to linger. We tell ourselves there will be time later, next week, next month, next year. But life has a way of moving faster than we expect. And sometimes the difference between losing someone forever and finding them again is a single conversation that nobody wants to start. The brothers lost 11 years, but they didn't lose everything. And for many readers, that was the most powerful part of the story. Not the regret, not the misunderstanding, not even the pain. It was the reminder that sometimes, even after years of silence, a relationship isn't as gone as it seems. Sometimes the door is still there. Sometimes the person on the other side is waiting. And sometimes all that's needed is the courage to knock. Story 4. My grandfather's journals. There are some stories that stay with people because of how they end. Others stay with people because of a twist nobody saw coming. But every once in a while, a story spreads across Reddit because it forces thousands of people to stop and think about their own lives. This was one of those stories. The author explained that after his grandfather passed away, his family began sorting through decades of old belongings. At first, there was nothing unusual about the process. There were boxes of photographs, faded receipts, old holiday decorations, and the kind of forgotten keepsakes that seemed to accumulate over a lifetime. But buried among everything else was a mystery that nobody in the family had ever bothered to solve. For nearly 40 years, his grandfather had followed the exact same routine every Sunday afternoon. No matter the weather, no matter the season, no matter what else was happening in his life. He would drive to a small train station on the edge of town, sit on the same wooden bench, watch the trains arrive and depart, and then quietly return home a few hours later. Family members joked about it. Friends accepted it. Over time, it simply became one of those strange habits that nobody questioned anymore. Whenever someone asked why he kept going, he would smile and say, "I just enjoy watching the trains." It seemed like a harmless answer, a retired man with a simple routine. Nothing more. At least that's what everyone believed. Then, while cleaning out the attic after his death, the author discovered a small wooden box hidden behind several old shelves. Inside were hundreds of folded pages. And after reading the first one, he realized his grandfather hadn't been going to the train station to watch trains at all. The author spent hours reading the entries. Piece by piece, an entirely different version of his grandfather emerged. Decades earlier, before he married, before he had children, before he became the quiet old man everyone knew, Frank had been deeply in love with a woman named Eleanor. According to the entries, they met when they were both in their early 20s. Eleanor had recently moved to town. Frank described her as the kind of person who made every room brighter simply by entering it. They spent months together. Long walks, late-night conversations, dreams about the future. The journal entries painted a picture of a love story that seemed destined to last forever. Then reality intervened. Eleanor received an opportunity to move across the country for a career she had spent years pursuing. Frank wanted to follow her, but family responsibilities kept him in town. His father had become ill. His younger siblings depended on him. He couldn't leave. The two promised they would find a way to make it work. For a while they did. They exchanged letters, made phone calls whenever they could afford it, planned visits. But long-distance relationships were much harder in those days. Months stretched into years. Opportunities slipped away. Life became complicated. Then came the entry that changed everything. Frank wrote that Eleanor had sent a letter asking to meet him at the train station on a specific Sunday. She said she had something important to tell him and wanted to discuss their future. Frank spent the entire week preparing. He bought flowers, practiced what he wanted to say, imagined proposing, imagined finally building the life they had talked about for years. Sunday arrived. He waited. The train came. Passengers stepped off. Eleanor wasn't among them. He waited for the next train. Then the next. She never arrived. Days passed. Then weeks. Then months. No letter, no phone call, nothing. Eventually, he convinced himself she had changed her mind. Maybe she found someone else. Maybe she stopped loving him. Maybe she simply moved on. The uncertainty hurt. But eventually, he accepted it. Years later, he met the woman who would become his wife. They built a wonderful life together, raised children, created memories. Yet according to the journals, he never completely stopped wondering what happened that day. That was why he kept visiting the station. Not because he expected her to suddenly appear after decades. Not really. It was because part of him needed to believe there had been a reason. A tiny piece of hope survived year after year. The author kept reading. Then he discovered something astonishing. Hidden among the journals was an unopened envelope. The envelope was addressed to Frank. The postmark was nearly 40 years old. Somehow it had never been delivered. The author stared at it for several minutes before opening it. Inside was a letter from Eleanor. The date matched the exact week she was supposed to arrive at the train station. The author described his hands shaking as he read. Eleanor explained that she had fully intended to meet him. In fact, she had already purchased her train ticket. She planned to accept his proposal if he asked. She planned to move back. She planned to spend her life with him. Then, just 2 days before the trip, she was involved in a serious car accident. She survived, but suffered injuries that required months of recovery. During that recovery, she learned she had developed a medical condition that would permanently affect her health. The letter explained that she felt overwhelmed, frightened, and uncertain about her future. She didn't want Frank to feel obligated to care for her. She didn't want him sacrificing his life for someone whose future had suddenly become unpredictable. So she made what she believed was a selfless decision. She let him go. The letter apologized repeatedly. She admitted she still loved him, but believed he deserved a life free from the burden she feared she would become. The most heartbreaking part came near the end. Eleanor wrote that she knew he would probably hate her. She knew he would think she abandoned him. But she hoped that one day he would understand that she left because she loved him too much to ask him to stay. The author sat in silence after reading the letter. For almost 40 years, his grandfather had believed the woman simply chose not to come. In reality, she had spent those same years believing she had done the right thing by letting him go. Neither knew the truth. Neither got closure. Two lives were shaped by a misunderstanding that neither had the opportunity to correct. The story didn't end there. Determined to learn more, the author began searching for information about Eleanor. After weeks of research, he found an obituary. Eleanor had passed away only 3 years before Frank. The obituary included a photograph. The author recognized her immediately from old pictures in the attic. Then he noticed something that nearly brought him to tears. The obituary mentioned that Eleanor never married, never had children, never moved back. She spent most of her life working as a teacher. The author found a former colleague through social media and reached out. The colleague confirmed something extraordinary. According to her, Eleanor kept a framed photograph of Frank on her desk for decades. She rarely talked about him, but whenever she did, she referred to him as the love of my life. Suddenly, the entire story transformed into something much larger than a mystery. It became a story about timing, sacrifice, and the fragile nature of communication. Both people spent their lives believing they were protecting the other. Both spent decades carrying unanswered questions. Both moved forward because life demanded it, yet neither completely forgot. The final journal entry Frank ever wrote was only a few months before his death. It was surprisingly short. It simply said, "I don't think she'll ever come, and that's okay." Some people leave footprints on your heart that never disappear. The important thing is being grateful they were there at all. The author said that sentence completely changed his understanding of love. Most people think great love stories are defined by happy endings, marriage, growing old together, lifelong companionship. But sometimes the most powerful relationships aren't measured by how long they last. Sometimes they're measured by how deeply they shape us. Frank went on to love his wife, raise a family, build a meaningful life. Eleanor devoted herself to helping generations of students. Neither wasted their lives waiting. Yet both carried the memory of what might have been. The Reddit post exploded because readers recognized something painfully human in the story. Everyone has moments they wish had gone differently, conversations they wish they'd had, opportunities they wish they'd taken, questions they wish they'd asked. The story wasn't really about a train station. It wasn't really about a lost letter. It was about the realization that life is often shaped by moments we never fully understand. A missed message, a delayed letter, a decision made with good intentions, small events that quietly alter entire futures. The author ended the post by revealing that after learning the truth, he visited the train station himself. He sat on the same bench where his grandfather had spent so many Sundays. He watched the trains arrive and depart. He imagined the young man Frank once was, standing there with flowers in hand, waiting for a future that never arrived. Then he imagined Eleanor, injured and scared, writing a letter she hoped would explain everything. a letter that never reached its destination. Before leaving, he tucked a copy of Eleanor's letter beneath a bouquet of flowers on the bench, not because anyone would find it, not because it would change the past, but because after 40 years, someone finally knew the truth. And somehow, that felt like the ending both of them deserved. The end.